1, we're going to be talking about timesheet updates. There's essentially 6 capabilities I want to talk about that falls under the What's New category. First and foremost, there is a new Timesheet Grid. So this is in addition to the My Timesheet and Review and Approve capabilities you're familiar with. We've got a new timesheet. One of the key capabilities there is to filter for any timesheet across multiple time periods. Of course, once you're there, you can approve or return timesheets across these multiple periods. You can navigate directly from the Timesheet Grid to the flyout to perform various actions. And given that this is a common grid implementation, there's the ability to export timesheets via CSV to CSV. The second item of interest here is some additional timesheet configuration controls. They really fall into 3 buckets. One is hiding and showing these gauges that are presented to users on the timesheet and on My Timesheet. So the effort and project time gauges can be hidden or showed. The second piece that's very interesting for our user community is to be able to find additional timesheet attributes and make those available to the users that are within the My Timesheet and or Review and Approve pages. We've also included some additional attributes only available in Classic. They're now available in the timesheet. And the last piece here is that there is a capability to enable end user column configuration on these 2 modules. The third item here, time entry for ideas. The main thing here is to be able to capture the information on financials and capture those actuals. From a Classic standpoint, they didn't really have any place to go or be presented. So now actuals will be available for ideas. Yet there's no task available yet from an idea perspective, but there is the effort task that is created which resources enter their time against for an idea. Manual transaction is also supported for ideas, and then of course the financial jobs support these ideas, and more importantly the actuals being pushed to posted to financials or the cost plans. Fourth item I wanted to talk about was capability that's been added to various filters. The resource and resource manager filter now include the resource ID to help users identify different users that may have similar or same name. The fourth item here is adding a resource location parameter to the post timesheet job. So there's a new section in Classic added to the job for putting in a resource location. It allows that administrator to selectively control one or more quote-unquote locations for which these timesheets will be posted. Now, the last item here is we've enabled the ability to update the company name for a project after posting actuals. Prior to this release, that company name field could not be edited after posting actuals, so now it's editable and there's no functional changes. So those are the 6 capabilities that we're going to be covering off now in more detail. So let's get into why this is important. The Timesheet Grid, it allows managers to perform a variety of actions on a single view. So the key element here is in helping drive adoption of the modern UX. Managers now can locate timesheets across multiple periods. We got a lot of feedback from the existing review and approve screen, if you will, and the carousel that you would have to go through period by period to perform that function of reviewing or approving or returning those timesheets. A lot of input said, hey, I'd like to be able to look at that, more than one period. So we've added the grid, and one of the key capabilities there, key use case of that grid is that you can bring in multiple periods into that single view and perform this function. The second item here, timesheet configuration controls. Really, again, this is all about facilitating end user adoption and usability, but now the modern UX timesheet is now at parity with Classic. Third item here, we touched on, of course, earlier, timesheet for ideas. As I mentioned, we've already covered off on custom investment types, but customers are just really expecting the ability to post, time to this bucket, how much work is being allocated to a given idea, and be able to track that at the cost plan level. Users can now post timesheets directly through to those financial transaction tables. There's also that manual transaction ability for ideas via transaction entry or via Zog, of course. All those are doing so in Classic. With respect to ideas, they're now on par with other investment types with respect to posting actuals to financials. The last item on the page here is, again, just telling why it's important to add that resource ID to those 2 filters that are on the timesheet. So as you can imagine, in many companies, users have similar or the same names. So in this case, including that resource ID in those two filters provides that additional context for the person looking for resources to eliminate that confusion, and they can find people with ease. Adding the resource location parameter to the post timesheet job really came about as a requirement from large organizations with literally thousands of timesheet users, and they wanted to streamline that administrative effort associated with posting timesheets. So as you can imagine, the large organizations have employees that are geographically distributed, and now from a job perspective, they can batch process in a kind of follow the sun model based on those locations. So they don't have to do all timesheets at once. They can distribute the job and by location and reduce some of the administrative overhead and duration of those jobs running. So, obviously without that control or the ability to restrict a group of timesheets, a significant amount of time is spent to post all those approved timesheets. So we're really streamlining that job for those large organizations. The last item here, allowing that company name to be updated after posting actuals. This is, again, it's customer requested, and in some cases the company field is being used as a project categorization method, just like any other financial categorization methods that are there, like investment class or WIP class. So given that we couldn't find any business justification for making that field remain read-only, we've really just enabled that field to be edited regardless of the state of posting actuals. There's zero functional change to the product. It just allows an organization to a little more flexibility if they would like to use that attribute as a way to categorize projects. Okay, so let's talk about kind of what's changed. We'll get into each one of those 6 items here. So we're looking here at the timesheet grid. You can see it's positioned there as in kind of this module approach, just like we're doing modules for the other investments like a project or a custom investment type or an idea. So timesheets is the new module. And basically this is that common grid. You can see all the filter support, the save views, the column panels, the flyout there for further information of a given line item. Export to CSV, of course, is there. So, like the key use case here is allowing those people that are responsible for approving timesheets to come in and filter for multiple periods and then perform their work. It's got the filter support, resource OBS, resource manager, etc. And all the columns in view is there as a filter type to further refine what you're looking for and create that save view. And of course, export to CSV. We've got a lot of feedback over the years that customers would like to be able to export to CSV and perform some other functions once they get to that point. So I'll cover that in more detail in our demo. Now, the timesheet grid is available by default upon the upgrade. However, there is a way to configure that on the blueprint. There is a timesheet. We see the timesheet grid actually becoming a replacement for the review and approve quote module. So customers may wish to not enable that module and just present the timesheet and the timesheet modules and go from there. Obviously, from a blueprint standpoint, there is a default blueprint, which is uneditable when you first go in, just like all the other blueprints you're familiar with. So you just need to copy it and name it something that makes sense for the organization, so then you can go in and perform your configuration. And as I mentioned, all 3 of the modules are enabled out of the box. The visuals that are on this screen are just showing examples of the review and approve module. And I'm using the term module to be consistent with how we refer to other blueprints. So these are examples of the review and approve module not being enabled. The timesheet configuration controls. So this slide's got a few things on it. First off, on the left-hand side, there's additional fields that were available in Classic that weren't available in the My Timesheet and or review and approve modules. So these are captured here as all the Classic fields or attributes that are now available to be presented to end users. When you're in Classic and organizing how you want it presented in the timesheet, of course, there is the down, positioning that you can do. But from an end user perspective, as they go in, if the configuration capability is enabled, as they select them, they will be presented in the My Timesheet and Review and Approve modules in the order in which they're selected. So I just need to be aware of that. Moving over to the right here, the other configuration controls here are, allowing the end user configuration, number one. Do you want to enable that for the end users? Do you want to hide or show these gauges, the effort gauge or the project time gauge? These other two, line up just putting in totals and having the system peanut butter distribute, the enter time evenly over the days, or do this attestation report. Those are already there. So then now you have a total of 5 configuration options there. Should you enable end user column configuration, the view on the right here is the column panel that shows up on the My Timesheet and the Review and Approve modules. There's a little bit different user experience on the Timesheets Grid, and also navigating into the system and updating that company name is now available there. Okay, so a little bit more detail here on the configuration options. I've hovered over the 3 that we'll touch on today in the demonstration, that allowing the end user configuration that's enabled by default, and then there's the options to hide and show the gauges, and those are all checked by default. This is just an example of the capabilities that are there. I guess I should make a correction here for the purpose of the recording, that the end user column configuration is not enabled by default. You'd have to come in and check that. The end user experience by when those gauges are displayed, the upper image, of course, is the behavior today, where the gauges are positioned. The bottom screen here is just an example of when only the effort gauge is displayed. So this is just in a scenario where the organization is just going to use one of them. And with the end user column configuration, you can see the column icon, or the columns tab that shows up on the right-hand side of the grid here. And this applies to only My Timesheet and the Review and Approve module, should you have it enabled. From a cost plan perspective and capturing actuals, first and foremost, if you look at the lower right part of the screen, this release now includes the ability to capture the actuals, revenue, unit, 4 ideas, and custom investment types. So you'll see the new attributes that are there that are available when you navigate to the cost plan and open the column panel. And should you expose and look to capture actuals, you can see in the upper image, as a result of some time capture performed for that effort task, you can see the actual cost begins to show up per period. So there's obviously the per period configuration in the view options area, and also the totals that you're seeing here that show up on the far right side. Okay. We talked about the couple of the resource ID being shown in the resource and resource manager pull down on the in timesheet area. The left side, of course, shows you what it looks like in 15.7 and older. In 15.7.1 is on the right-hand side, so we're bringing in that resource ID in those 2 filters, so it provides that additional context to eliminate user confusion when searching for users. And we've been doing this kind of iteratively throughout other areas of the product to include the resource ID. There's a number of places where this still is required, but at least we're making that change here in Timesheets. The other feature here is adding that parameter section to the post timesheet job in particular. We'll go through this in part of the demo, but there's a new section that's been added to the page where you can selectively control 1 or more locations for which the timesheets will be posted when you run the job, whether it's scheduled or ran immediately. The last piece here is this enabling the ability to update that company name. So as I mentioned before, this was a read-only field after posting actuals was performed. So customers requested that they wanted to be able to update that at any time because they're using it as a categorization method. And as I mentioned before, allowing this to be an editable field now regardless of the state of the posting of actuals. There's no functional changes. It just helps our larger organizations when it comes to using categorizations. Okay. All right. So we're just moments away from the demo here. We're going to, of course, take a look at that timesheet grid, learn how to use that. We're going to then look at the blueprint to configure the timesheet modules. We're going to also look at the administration configuration controls to hide or show those gauges, define the timesheet attributes that are going to be displayed, and enable end user column configuration. And then as part of that, we'll take a look at that, the drill into where that post timesheet job has been updated, and we'll close out with the cost plan for an idea and noting how you record actuals. Okay, so I'm going to pop out of PowerPoint here. All right, so you should be able to see here, we're just landing on the project tiles page. I'm Ian. I've got a lot of administrative capabilities here, so I'm going to be able to see a lot of capabilities. So first thing, of course, we're going to go into timesheets. Oops. And so, as you would expect, we land on the My Timesheets timesheet module, and it's going to, just like normal, it's going to land on the open period. You'll notice right away what we talked about a second ago is the modules themselves are all positioned here to the left versus kind of center in the stage. Pay attention because we're going to come back and change this. The gauges are presented right now, and you'll also notice that column panel is not enabled here. We're going to change that, but I just wanted you to pay attention to what the screen looks like at the moment. So, of course, the new module that we're going to touch on is the Timesheets Grid. So, first thing you want to notice is this is the common grid component. It's got all the capabilities we talked about, group by, changing the columns, the filters, the save views, the column panel, etc. Right? The key thing here is this is a read-only grid. You cannot go into the fields themselves and make adjustments. If you're going to make changes, you do that through the configurable or through the flyout, which we'll touch on in a second. But one thing I wanted to talk about was the save views. So I've got a few here. My time approval view is that it's just something I've named, but it's capturing the timesheets from a number of periods, right? So that was the key thing here. You'll see the filter I have in this view is going back in time from September to December. So that's right off the bat the key use case for customers, for those users that want to look at timesheets, whether they're open timesheets, and across multiple periods. So that was a key thing that we solved, and I think our customers are going to be really happy with that capability. The next one I wanted to hit on was, I just named this adjustments. The key thing to point out here is, you can bring in those different columns. You have that now visibility, which is not available on review and approve. So oftentimes, this allows the users here to determine that something is actually a line item in their timesheet area because it's going through an adjustment process versus it being a duplicate timesheet. So that's going to be a big help for organizations to at least triage what they believe are redundant or duplicate timesheets. I've got another view here called current period. This kind of behaves just like the review and approve sheet now, and going to search for different users. So like I said, as we evolve the capabilities in the timesheets grid, we anticipate that the review and approve module itself will be less in favor, and at some point we plan to end of life it, but obviously they're going to coexist until the time is appropriate. The other thing I wanted to talk about here was, save views for are not like per timesheet, it's per user, just like all the other save view capabilities across projects, ideas, and custom investment types. And the other thing is there's views created by me and views created by others. So This one I know is an example of Ed Carmen, who came in and he created his own, My Timesheet Grid with the columns that he wants to use. And so when I select that, it's just going to go back and use the attributes that Ed chose. So just be aware of that. Now, as mentioned in prior sessions, we do have a plan in an upcoming release. Hopefully it's the next release that we're targeting for that administrative control of saved views, but that's going beyond the scope of what we want to talk about today. Just a reminder. Okay, so let's move on. Let's kind of move into how do you approve a timesheet here. So I'm back on my time approval grid. I can see here Beth has a timesheet that has been submitted. I see when I select that row, I think I touched on this briefly, but these are all the columns that are going to be available to users on the grid to, obviously configure it and create a view for themselves. So when I select that row for Beth Roberts, it's going to open up the flyout. First thing you'll notice is the details here. It's got that configuration capability, just like other flyouts. That's standard capability. And that, again, if you had a saved view, this would follow the name of the view. I didn't do anything special for today. I just wanted to point that out to you. But back on the timesheet, there's a couple of navigation elements here. So there's review, this is typically where you, as the person responsible for reviewing or approving this timesheet, would navigate to. And notice that the gauge is still there, and obviously there's the review and approve, or review and approve and return functions that are there. So you're kind of taking a look at those details. I'm going to close out this real quick. We're not going to approve it just yet. The other element here is to go to the timesheet. Notice I went right over to My Timesheets, and this is the timesheet for Beth Roberts, right? I could approve or return here as well. And once I'm here, of course, I can do other things and go find another timesheet for another person, but we're not going to do that right now. I just wanted to give you to see what happens there. Let's see. The other thing here is on review and approve. I'm going to go back to the prior period. I'm going to close this for a second, but I just wanted to quickly show you the updates to the resource filter. So if I want to look for Beth Roberts and bring her into the timesheet, there I have my, boom, there it is. She has submitted something for a particular approval cycle. The other filter here, of course, is Resource Manager that's been updated, showing the resource ID. So I just wanted to give you a quick view of that. So let's go back to the Timesheets Grid. And I'm going to go back to Beth Roberts. And we're actually going to go ahead and approve her timesheet, just kind of move the flow forward here. So I'm going to come here, I'm going to say approve, and of course, what you would expect occurs, you get the message, and you are done. Now, behind the scenes, of course, there's multiple approvals going on. Let me quickly go to kind of into Classic and talk about the posting real quick. I'm going to go into my job area. I'm going to go into jobs, my available jobs, do a filter on post, and as you know, these are all the jobs that are required to run either manually or scheduled in the proper sequence to post all the way through to cost plans. So the first thing we're going to see here, I just wanted to have you understand post timesheets. The parameter has been updated. There's a new section here for parameters. So I'm going to come in here, and the idea is that I want to schedule all of my APAC jobs to run. So I would go to that region only and save those parameters and then run the job. I'm not going to run the job right now, but that is the behavior and how you would leverage the new parameter section there to allow that follow the sun approach, if you will, to running the jobs. Okay, we're going to do a couple more administrative things before we come back to timesheets. First thing I want to get back to is notice that we have the 3 modules here. I'm going to go into blueprints real quick, and there is the default blueprint sitting there, the standard timesheet. As I click into that, you'll notice that it's not editable, right? And that's normal behavior of any default blueprint. So what I need to do is I need to copy this, create a copy, and it's going to put it in here, right up here. I'm going to rename it. I'm going to call it Enterprise Timesheet. Got that. I'm going to go into it, and now I've got my edit function, as you would expect. And like I said, I believe that as we improve timesheets over time, and I'll talk Timesheets Grid over time, and I'll talk about some of the things we're working on, the review and approve module may become out of favor. So we'll just go ahead and configure it that way and publish, and we're all done. The other administrative function I want to perform real quick is related to the column configuration and the grids. So and allowing the gauges to be hidden or showed. So I'm going to come over here into admin, and notice I'm in the Phoenix UI here in Classic, and I'm on timesheet options. So there's a couple things I want to talk about here. The additional fields that are going to be available within the Classic UX are all positioned here to be selected and organized in their order, and basically their column order. That's all there, and if you do not enable end user column configuration, that's what the end user will expect. So the administrator now has a lot more control over the fields that they wish to include in the My Timesheets and review and approve should you use it. So that will, this is how you control it, add all the additional columns, and then if you don't want to allow end user configuration, great, but you have more flexibility now on additional information to put into the timesheet. So we're going to go ahead and enable end user configuration, and we're going to remove both gauges. Okay? And as I mentioned, these are the 2 options that were already there for allowing the user to just enter in a total and have it distribute evenly across the days and or require that attestation report upon submit. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save, right? And I'm going to come back into the modern UX. I'll hit refresh, of course. And now we're going to come back to the timesheets area. It's going to land, of course, like for me, as Ian over here on that open period, and you'll see straight away the additional fields that are available to me. So as I begin to, so notice that I just got, input code and charge code are there, the days of the week and total. So those are input type code, daily actuals, the charge code, and the total. So now what I mentioned before, if I'm going to start adding additional attributes to this grid here, the My Timesheet grid, I'll just click baseline. Notice that I'm going to close this out so you can see it. It's going to add it over here. If I put ETC, it's going to put it next. So just be aware that as you add them, since the other ones were already added, it's going to append them in on the far right. So if you are a user and you want to change the order, deselect all of them. So for example, if you want baseline and EDC to be positioned over here, you'd basically want to come into here, check, deselect everything, and then start putting things in order. And that's how you would regain baseline over here and ETC over here. I'm not going to do it right now just because it's going to take a little time. So I just wanted to be aware as the user selects additional columns, they are going to be presented in the order in which they're selected. That's a key thing to know. Okay, so that's that. You'll notice straight away on My Timesheets, the gauges are gone, right? And wherever you would expect to see them, they're removed. So for example, on the Timesheets Grid, I already submitted I approved Beth Roberts, but let's go into that. I've got the go to timesheet, and notice it's moved here, it's removed there from Beth. So it's just removed from wherever normally it would show up. So that's a good thing. A lot of customers wanted flexibility that it was irrelevant to show it. So now there's that capability to remove it. Okay. So with that said, let's switch gears and go to cost plans and talk about the time approval and how actuals are captured. So I'm going to go into ideas. I'm going to just navigate to a targeted idea. And notice I only have the details and financials modules deployed for this particular, based on this blueprint. If you recall, in the last release, we also enabled custom sub-objects and links. So those are just not being used right now. But for today's purposes, I wanted to go into financials. And we'll go into our cost plan here. This was introduced in the prior release, nothing new here other than the added capability to capture actuals. So obviously some work has happened. Ed has come in, entered the effort task, time against the effort task, just like I showed Beth Roberts doing. If I were to run those jobs, Beth would also show up here as another internal labor. That's easy for me to say. Line item here for December. So I've configured through the view options menus, the per period metrics. We've now got all these additional attributes that are available to be included in the per period spot. And then from a column panel selection perspective, all of the additional totals are now here. Costs, revenue, units, variance, etc. Are all available as of this 15.7.1 release. So there was nothing extra that the user had to do to get the actuals in here other than capturing time against the idea, effort task, running the various jobs, and configuring the grid to include the information. Okay, so I know we weren't going to be able to use the entire hour here, but let me come back to the deck. The demo's done there, so I wanted to show you there. Let's come back and switch gears to some of the things that you need to be aware of. Let me go full screen. Okay. All right. We've touched on some of these during the slides and the demo, but just to have it here for you to be aware of, that the timesheet blueprint configuration applies to all timesheet users. You may get the question that says, I'd like to have this group use a certain set of those modules and another group use a different set of those modules. And I'm referring to the modules of My Timesheet, Review and Approve, and the Timesheets Grid. They apply to all users. So we'll look at that as a feature for being able to segregate or have different user groups, have different blueprint configurations. But for now, it's all users. We did mention that the end user configurations and saved views on the Timesheets Grid is per user, right? Every user can create any number of views, just like the other portions of the application where the common grid is implemented. You'll get that created by me and created by others. The third bullet here is the end user configuration capability. If it's enabled, what you're doing is really providing that extra tab for that details tab, or the columns tab, I should say, for my timesheets and the review and approve modals. There's a typo here. I forgot to add review and approve timesheet modals. And be advised, like we said, the order in which the user selects those attributes determine the order in which they are displayed. The other element here is that the timesheet grid in this release does not support kind of the virtual rows or the virtual timesheets. For example, if the organization follows this model where 100 users are configured for open for time entry, none of these users have navigated to their timesheet to enter time. In this situation, that grid, the timesheet grid, will not show. In other words, the manager won't have visibility to how many out of those 100 users have not entered time. So the ability for the timesheet grid to include virtual timesheets is targeted for the next release. So just be aware of that. Now, if the user is allocated to a idea, let me get this right. If the user is allocated to the idea effort task via the team, or actually if they're allocated to the team and an effort task is created, then you will get that row. There's just certain sequence of events in which the virtual entry won't be there. So all of you familiar with the virtual, be aware of that. I wanted to put in one bullet point here that the administrator now has configuration controls for these various fields within My Timesheet and the Review and Approve modules. So the new fields on the left-hand side are the ones that have been now made available and can be configured for the modern UX timesheets. So just now you have a central place to look at all the fields that are available. Those new fields that are available in those two modules are not available on the timesheet grid because these fields are really associated with time entry, which is a sub-object of timesheet, and therefore just not applicable at the timesheet level. So just be aware of that. Different set of fields are available on My Timesheet and Review and Approve versus the Timesheets Grid. We touched on this earlier in the demo, but I thought it was worth having a slide here that users now have the ability, given the column panel and the flexibility there with the different columns you can bring into the grid, to show if a line item indicates an adjustment there's a status associated with the adjustment, whether it's being adjusted or it quote unquote is adjustment. I was talking with support and got some feedback prior to developing this content that oftentimes customers open a support case assuming there's a duplicate timesheet issue, when in fact it's just a side effect of there's an adjustment in process. So now users have that ability to check using the new timesheet grid to validate if there is in fact a duplicate timesheet issue or it's just an adjustment. A couple more things here. Just like we talked about on day one related to custom investment types, modern UX does not include, for ideas, does not include support for budgets or benefits currently. We're looking at that for a future upcoming release. Manual transaction is available. Manual transaction entry is available, although it's performed through the classic UX. Be aware the incident category attribute is not supported because incident time tracking is not supported in the modern UX, timesheet. I've mentioned a couple times that we believe the Timesheets Grid will really become the go-to utility to review and approve timesheets. So one thing that is not available in this release is kind of this right-click or action menu to approve approve a timesheet right from the grid. That is going to be, obviously you have to use the flyout today to do that. We're looking at, right-click, what have you, to perform a single action. You saw in the hierarchy demo where the multi-select grid is available. We look at applying that capability to the timesheets grid so you can perform a bulk action, for example, to check, and approve multiple timesheets directly from the grid. So that is planned for a future release as well. Just a couple things to be aware of here, mainly as reminders, because as I was going through this, I stumbled on it myself, but that's perhaps an education thing. But in order for to properly post timesheet actuals for ideas and, of course, custom investment types, make sure that those investments are financially enabled. Right, so this is just a screenshot here of the left-hand portion of open for time entry, status is open, etc. The second point is make sure those resources are financially enabled, so that right screen there is kind of a pop out. You know, obviously just remember to make sure all of those attributes are selected to financially enable the resources. One more friendly reminder is in order to, you know, we touched on this a little bit when we reviewed the update to the post timesheets job. Obviously, these are a subset of jobs that can be run, but these are related to all of the financial posting into the IDEA cost plans and, of course, any cost plan really. And there's a sequence, of course, that needs to be followed to run all these through and post them to timesheets. Just a reminder, I know most of you already know all that. All right, so that concludes the prepared material for today.